The Chicken Asylum, an Alex Reynolds mystery. Author, Fred Hunter. Publisher, St. Martin's, Griffin, New York. Narrator, Eric Aust. Chapter 13. Nelson got to our house in less than 10 minutes, which meant either he broke all speed records or he wasn't at his hotel when Mother called his cell phone. He listened intently as I told him about the house with its catch of explosives. When I finished, he stared at me for several moments. "How do you know about this?" he asked at last, his face as hard as granite. "Kismet," I said. "Let's just say we happened on it," said Peter. "I'm not asking how you know about the house. I'm asking how you know what's in the basement." "We looked," I said with a glance at Peter. "You were inside the house." "Yes, but you're wasting time. Right now Well, you're in the house legally. We weren't invited, if that's what you mean." "I mean, did you break in?" I glanced at Peter again, then back at Nelson. "The door was open." "Open? Or unlocked?" "Oh, for Christ's sake, don't you realize?" He raised his palm, his expression unchanging. "Despite what you may think, we can't rush over there and arrest him because of what you saw in a basement that you weren't in legally. We can't even get a warrant to search the place based on what you saw. We would have to find some other reason to go in." The four of us were standing in the middle of the living room. Mother, Peter, and I looked at each other, apparently all having the same unpleasant thought. If we told Nelson we had traced James to the house, he could probably go over there. But then, of course, we'd be implicating ourselves. Under the circumstances, we could have just told him that we'd happened to see James there, maybe through a window. And perhaps that would have given them what they needed to get a warrant. And the situation was now dicey enough that it's probably what we should have done, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I couldn't bring myself to turn James in so bluntly. I left it to Mother, reasoning that with her newfound resolve to call Nelson in, she would go ahead, but she and Peter remained mute as well. Anyway, we told Nelson where the house was, and I figured if the feds went there, they'd find James for themselves. "You don't need a warrant if something's out in plain view, do you?" I asked. "That's correct." "Well, unless they're complete idiots right now, they're loading the stuff in their truck so they can run. They deserted the house next door. If you go behind it, you'll be able to see what they're doing. I mean, if you actually see them loading explosives, you can arrest them, right?" "We'll still eventually have to explain how we made the connection." We can go into all that later," Mother said quickly. "You'd better get a move on now, or they'll be gone." "You're right," he said after a beat. He was pulling the cell phone out of his pocket as he headed for the door. "Larry!" Mother stopped him. "These people know where we are now." He hesitated for a second, looking as if he wanted to ask how that was possible, but he thought the better of it. "Don't worry, Frederick's men will remain on guard. I'll see to it. And Nelson," I added, "let us know what you find there, will you?" "Very well," he said after a long pause. Once he'd gone, I said to Mother, "We'll go into all that later?" "How are we going to do that? We can't tell them how we tracked James to that house without implicating ourselves and Stevie in his escape." "First things first," she replied, looking more concerned than I could ever recall seeing her. "First, let Nelson and Frederick stop them, and then we can worry about explanations and the rest." Of course, the concept of worrying about it later is all well and good if all you've done is killed a Yankee. It's a different matter when you've run afoul of a bunch of terrorists who are known to be vengeful and your own government, and you don't exactly have anything more pressing to occupy your mind. It had been after 10:30 when Nelson left us, so we knew it would be late before we heard anything. We sat in front of the TV, sat not watching the news, and then not watching reruns of sitcoms. None of us spoke or made a move to go to bed. I was surprised to find myself secretly hoping they wouldn't find James when they got to the house. At the same time, a part of me wanted him to be picked up so that the whole thing would be over. at least for us. Then again, I didn't know if it could ever be over for me. If James were to disappear into the American judicial system, which is what was sure to happen if he was caught with the terrorists and explosives, I don't think I'd ever be free of the ghost of that misty-eyed boy at the foot of our bed telling us he was homosexual. Even the memory of it right then started my heart on a swing back in his favor. But the pendulum was stopped in its course when I remembered his duplicity and what he was involved in. Fredericks had been right. These people would use anything to win you over to their role, and in this case, I'd been the chief dupe. So strongly duped that even knowing what we know now, I still didn't really want him to be found. I pressed my fingers to my temples as if that might stop my mind from spinning. Peter, sitting next to me, noticed this and said, "Do you have a headache?" "Not really," I said as I rubbed the sides of my head. "I think I have a merry-go-round in there." He smiled and stroked the back of my head with his palm, then slid his hand into mine. Mother was starting to doze in an armchair a few feet away when the three of us were jolted to our feet by the phone. "I'll get it," Mother said, reaching for the phone on the end table by the couch. She picked up the receiver, put it to her ear, then said, "Hello." "Oh, hello, Larry." She listened for several seconds, her expression growing very dark. "Really? What will you do now?" "I see. Yes. Well, thank you very much for letting us know." She said goodbye to him, then replaced the receiver. "Well," I said, "they didn't find anyone." "What?" "Nelson and Fredericks and his men did just as we suggested. They went back of the empty house and looked. The truck was gone." "That's impossible," said Peter. "They couldn't have gotten all that stuff loaded since we called Nelson. There was too much of it." "They didn't," said Mother. "Apparently they fled. Very fast. Nelson found the basement door wide open." "Of course he did," I said sardonically. "Their men went in. It was about a third empty, so the jihad got some of the material out. Not all of it." "And the people?" "Nowhere to be found. Larry is on his way here now. I have a feeling he'll have some rather pointed questions to ask." "What are we going to do?" She paused, pursed her lips. "Discretion is no longer the better part of valor. We're going to have to tell him everything we know." "Everything?" "Well, almost everything," she said with a sly smile. "Nelson arrived alone and was with us for over an hour. I was glad Fredericks wasn't along because that was an ordeal that I just wasn't ready to go through. Despite the late hour and the seriousness of the situation, Nelson's equilibrium never varied. While I grew increasingly irritable, he opened by asking us how we had found the house, and we maintained steadfastly that we'd simply happened on it. An idea he received with guarded skepticism. There was nothing else we could have told him, aside from implicating ourselves in James's escape. To have owned up to how we found the house would also have implicated Stevie, and possibly Joe and Mickey as well. Having so thoroughly gotten them involved, I'd silently resolved I'd rather go to jail than cause my friends any more trouble. It didn't matter that they'd all agreed to become involved because they believed in what we were doing. Nelson then asked for the details of what we'd seen in the basement so that they could have some idea of what was missing, and we filled him in as best we could. As near as he could figure, the jihad had removed 2 rows of the fertilizer and at least 2 of the metal drums. Maybe not enough to topple a tower, but still enough to wreak some havoc. Then he reverted to how we'd found the house. "For Christ's sake, what does it matter?" I said. "You've got the explosives. It's not like the jihad is going to come back to claim it and take you to court because you found it illegally." "But they took some of it," said Nelson. "And if we catch them when we go to court, we're going to have to explain how we tracked it down. Unless, of course, they use what they've taken first." "Larry," said Mother, "you're simply going to have to take our word for it. It was just blind luck. That's all we can say about that." She looked over at me and cocked her head in his direction. I realized this was my cue to tell him the rest. Nelson, as for them using it, there's a couple of things we didn't tell you about what happened when we went there. We didn't have time to tell you earlier. First of all, we saw James. Did you? I nodded. And we talked to him. He told us... I know this sounds crazy, but he told us that they were planning to blow up a restaurant. James told you that? Yes. I know it doesn't make sense. The only restaurant we've heard of in this case is the House of Persia, and they wouldn't blow that up, would they? Mother asked. I wouldn't think so. It's in Uptown. There's nothing of any value or real importance around it, and they had much more fuel than they needed to use on it. There you are, said Mother. But still, that's what he said, I added. That's very interesting, said Nelson. He got up from the couch, signaling that the lengthy interview had finally come to an end. You think that means something, I said, that they were going to hit a restaurant? Yes, I do. If it's true. If it's true, I thought, that's the problem. Do you think it actually could have something to do with the House of Persia? That's the first thing I intend to look into. He started for the door. Nelson, there's one other thing. We saw someone else there. Yusuf Al-Ansari. He's come to town. Yes, he replied. I thought he might. Once Nelson had gone, there was nothing left for us to do but go to bed. Frustrated, dog-tired, and more than a little uneasy. Having a group of terrorists, a group we'd crossed, on the lam in our city wasn't exactly comforting. I was woken by the ringing of the phone. At first, I thought it was the middle of the night, but when I forced my eyes open, I found the sun was out and the clock read 9:20. I grabbed the receiver off the phone on the bedside table. Yeah, I said groggily. Alex, it is me. The sound of his voice was enough to snap me fully awake. James? What? What the hell are you calling here for? I need help. I need you. You've got to be kidding. What is it? Peter asked, roused to full consciousness by the tone of my voice. James, I mouthed at him. No, I do not kid, James said. I get away from them. I don't know where to go. Please, I need you. What do you mean you got away from them? You're one of them. No, I am not one. I tell you that already, but you do not believe me. I am not one. Last night you said, I say what I say because I want you to leave to be safe. I was silent for a second. It might be all well and good, but I couldn't reconcile it with other things he'd said. Did you really go to them, or did they kidnap you? Did they come and get you from Stevie's? He hesitated. No, go. There myself, but nothing. That's that, I said sharply, although I couldn't for the life of me figure out why he would tell me the truth about that if he wanted my help. Surely under the circumstances it would have been wiser to lie. Please, Alex, he pleaded sadly. I explained everything to you later, but how did you get away from them? There was a hollow sound through the receiver, like the noise you get when you hold a shell to your ear. He put his hand over the mouthpiece, or someone had. It only lasted a couple of seconds. After you left, I don't know the word. Everybody's running around, clearing the house. I get away then. I went silent again, my mind clouding over as it sometimes does when I've worried a problem so much my brain takes a holiday. I suppose what he was saying could be true, but I doubted it. Well, if you need help, all right, just come here to our house. We'll try to sort it out. No, I cannot do this, he said anxiously. There are men that watch your house. They will arrest me. Once again, plausibility, helped by the fact that his throat sounded raw and I could tell he was crying. Please, he continued, please, can you and Peter come to me? I am alone. Please, Alex. I shook my head, both to clear it and to mourn the death of the last vestige of my sanity. All right, where are you? I am at bar you take me to. I am outside of it. It is the only place I know. Charlene's. All right, stay out of sight. I'll be there as soon as I can. There was another hesitation on his part, then he said, Thank you. I hung up. What's going on? Peter asked. Get dressed, I said, jumping out of bed. I opened the bedroom door and called out, Mother, are you up? I'm down here, darling. Her voice floated up the stairs. Who was that on the phone? Come up here, would you? Peter and I threw on some clothes as Mother came up the stairs and down the hall. I was buttoning my shirt when she reached us. That was James, I said. He wants our help. I repeated what he'd said. Mother sat on the end of the bed and listened, her face a sober mask. That sounds rather fishy, Peter said when I'd finished. He got away from them. They don't seem that careless to me. How did he sound? Mother asked. I shrugged. Exhausted, frightened. He could have been putting me on, but you don't think he was, said Peter. I heaved the weariest sigh I could muster. I've told you before, I don't know what to think of him anymore. He said he could explain everything. What do you want to do? I took a deep breath. Go down there and get him. Talk to him. Alex, they lost us last night. They could be trying to get us back. I know that. I'm not going down there alone. He put his hands on his hips. Who were you expecting to go with you? Don't worry. I didn't mean I'd be all right because you'd be with me. I haven't completely lost my mind. And I'm going to call Nelson. I went to the phone and started to dial the number of his cell phone. What if James is telling the truth? If he is, he doesn't have anything to fear from Nelson. I let the phone ring several times. There was no answer. I hung up. Damn, he's not there. He's not in his coat, said Peter. I curled my lips. He's not answering. Look, you stay here and keep trying to get him. And tell him what's happened and where I've gone and ask him to meet me there. Why not just go out there and tell one of our guards to come with you? Because they're Frederick's men. If James is in on the level and alone, he'll have a chance with Nelson. Nelson will at least listen to him. He doesn't have a chance in hell with Frederick's. Anyway, if they're still listening to our calls, they already know where he is, and they'll probably beat me to him. At least wait till I get hold of him before you leave, and then I'll come with you. I shook my head. There's no time. I'll be careful. I'll try to scope out the situation before I do anything, and I'll try to wait for you and Nelson if I can. But if I take too long to get down there, he's going to think something's wrong. Remember, he knows how long it takes to get there from our house. Exactly. If it's a trap, that's probably why they chose it. Either way, they're going to think there's something wrong if I don't get there fast. Once you get Nelson, follow me down. Remember, you're the only other one who can point Yusuf al-Ansari out to him. Not quite the only one, said Mother. You're not coming with me, I announced loudly, jabbing my index finger at her. Of course not, she replied. You're not? I couldn't have been more surprised if she'd sprouted horns. I was expecting the usual protest, or the innocent smile she gives me when she agrees to do something but has no intention of following through. This sudden sincere acquiescence scared me. No, I'm not. I'm going to Stevie's. What? Why? I asked incredulously. I want to have a talk with him. Now, I want you to do something for me, Alex. If you find that James is indeed alone, if it at all possible, I want you to bring him to Stevie's apartment. You're kidding, I said. I'm ready to turn him over to Nelson, and you think he's entirely innocent? Why? For many reasons, she said kindly. I think I know why he's done what he's done, but there's no time to go into it now. Besides, I think it may be better if you learn it for yourself. Thank you, Billy Burke, I replied. His own people think he's a liar. That in itself should be significant enough, she replied opaquely. I sighed. There was no arguing with her when she got like this. Have you forgotten that Stevie is still under surveillance? We didn't see anybody when we were there, said Peter. That doesn't mean there wasn't anyone. It doesn't matter now, said Mother. It's a chance we'll have to take. Whatever you say, I said as I headed for the stairs. I had the cab driver take me to North Avenue, then head south on Wells. Okay, now, drive slow, but not too slow. I don't want to attract any attention. Just drive sort of slow. The driver gave me a lingering glance in the rearview mirror, assessing just how much trouble he thought I might be. But he did as I asked. As always, the street was lined with cars on both sides, but given the time of day, there were some gaps. Okay. A little slower, I said as we approached Charlene's. But not too slow. At first, I didn't see James, but when we glided past the bar, I spotted him huddled in the space between Charlene's and the building directly to the north. His head was lowered, and he was resting it against the wall. I had the driver stop at the next corner. I toyed with the idea of having him turn the cab around, pick James up, and take us back to our home. But I thought it better to wait there with James for Nelson to show up, rather than walk him into a nest of Frederick's men. I paid the driver and got out of the cab. He peeled away as if trying to make up for the lethargic way I'd made him drive down the street. As I walked back to the bar, I kept my eyes open, scanning the nooks and crannies around the buildings, and peering up toward their roofs for any sign of an ambush, but didn't see anyone. The sun was bright, and Wells is very open, practically devoid of anything that would obstruct the view. Nobody was approaching me on the sidewalk from either direction, and nobody appeared to be sitting in the parked cars. The whole area seemed deserted. I came to a stop at the opening next to the bar. James? He raised his head slowly. His face was badly bruised, and there was dried blood on the rim of his left nostril and the right corner of his mouth. Alex, he said haltingly, his eyes filling with tears. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. There's no need to. I was cut off by a voice from behind me. Get in! I turned around very slowly and swallowed hard at what I saw. Yusuf Al-Ansari was seated in a car at the curb. He and the driver had apparently secreted themselves on the floor, out of sight, while I approached. The window was open, and the muzzle of the same automatic weapon he'd sported the night before was pointed at my heart. I'm sorry, James said. They tell me what to say. They make me do it. Get in, he ordered again. Or I will kill you where you stand. He reached back and flung open the rear passenger door. I glanced over my shoulder at James, hoping to convey that I understood the full weight of his betrayal, then slowly walked to the car. Once I was inside, Al-Ansari ordered me to slide over to the other side. He then leaped out and climbed in beside me, while James got in the front seat. Go, go, go! Al-Ansari shouted at the driver, who complied immediately, hanging a quick U-turn and heading for the loop. Al-Ansari shoved the gun painfully into my chest with his left hand, then drew back his right and backhanded me several times across the face. The bones inside my head seemed to rattle as my face was thrown one way, then the other. Where's your friend? He said. You were both supposed to come. He's busy. He delivered several more slaps. I felt like my thoughts were being dislodged, as if my head was swinging back and forth, but my brain was staying in place. He stopped hitting me, but kept the gun jammed into my chest. It doesn't matter. We will attend to him later. First, we take care of you. Because of you, our plans have to change. We're almost ready to begin, but you make us lose our materials. Now it will take time to stockpile again. Precious lost time while people die. Well, people die. What are you talking about? I asked, knowing it was inadvisable for me to speak. He leaned into me harder, making the gun bite into my flesh. You starved my people to death with your sanctions. You rape the resources of the world, living like kings while the rest of the world starves. I don't believe this, I thought. I'm going to be killed over foreign policy? I don't have anything to do with any sanctions. Hell, hardly anybody in this country has anything to do with what the government does. That's the point, he said, his nose so close to mine I could feel the hot puffs of air coming from it. We're going to wake your people up to what you are doing, to the way your government is killing the rest of the world. What are a few American lives compared to an entire population that starves in the streets? So that's what the Red Jihad is all about. Food. He reared back and struck me several times with the back of his fist. A warm trickle of blood ran from my nose to my lips. And you caused us a delay. We were almost ready to strike here and in other cities, but you caused us a delay. Now we'll take more time to gather more materials. I didn't suppose it would have been any good to say I was just trying to help a little homo find happiness. Besides, I didn't know if he knew about James, and betrayed or not, I still wasn't about to cause his death by revealing his sexuality. All delays cost more the lives of my people, and for that, you are going to die. He sat back, shoved the weapon into some sort of holster under his long coat, and sat back, glaring out of the window with undisguised contempt for the riches evident in the passing cityscape. James sat motionless in the front passenger seat, staring out through the windshield. Tears stained his left cheek, but I didn't know if they were from my fate or if he was moved by the impassioned speech about his people. God, he's been clever, I thought, and I've been a complete and total idiot. When we reached Wacker, the driver turned west and followed the street as it curved south. I hazily wondered if just maybe Peter had managed to get hold of Nelson and get down to Charlene's in time to see me being taken away. But I was too slap-happy to give the idea much consideration, let alone attempt to see if we were being followed. I was sure that any move on my part would be met with a renewed assault. Instead, I wondered where they were taking me. If they were just planning to do away with me for the sake of pure vengeance, or if I was to be the center of their first blow against the evil empire. I had a feeling that the later was true, since they'd headed into the center of the city. When we came to a stop at a red light at Madison beside the Civic Opera House, Alan Sorry said, "Turn here," to the driver. I looked up and saw that directly across the street was the Mercantile Exchange, a building made up of twin towers whose corners are shaped into accordion pleats. I had a sudden sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. This is where they trade in agricultural futures. It would make sense if the Red Jihad was enraged over the lack of food in Iraq because of American sanctions, that they would try to hit us where we live or trade. The light changed and the driver steered the car around the corner, swinging to the far left of the street and coming to a stop at the back end of the building, which is bordered by a plaza overlooking the Chicago River. Alan Sorry flashed a malicious smile at me. "You will not give any sign that anything is wrong." He pulled a soiled handkerchief from his pocket and tossed it at me to wipe the blood from my nose. "If you do this, or you turn to run, I will shoot you dead. Now get out." I opened the door, and as I climbed out it, Alan Sorry jumped out from his side. I was surprised to see James got out of the car as well, although I don't know why, since he was one of them. It was perfectly logical that he should see it through to the end, or I should say, my end. They came around the car. Alan Sorry paused and said to the driver, "Go join the others." The driver said something in Arabic and sped away. "That way," said Alan Sorry, motioning us toward the plaza. I obeyed and headed into it. James stayed to my side and slightly behind me, and Alan Sorry followed us both. I estimated it to be a little after 10:30, which accounted for the small number of people on the plaza. On the right were racks so loaded with bikes they looked like an ugly modern sculpture. To the left was the glass wall of the first floor of the building. I caught my breath when I realized that behind the shaded glass of the first half of the wall was a restaurant of some sort. I wondered if this could be the restaurant that James had said they intended to blow up. It would make sense, since until Peter and I had blundered into their hideout, they probably had enough explosives to take down the entire mercantile exchange, including both towers. When Alan Sari instructed us to keep going, I breathed a sigh of relief. But it was short-lived. The second half of the back of the building had its outer glass wall completely covered with brown paper, hiding the interior from view. Alan Sari brought us to the door of this and handed the key to James. "Open it," he ordered. James stepped up to the door, twisted the key in the lock, and pulled it open. "Go in." I crossed the threshold into a vast, open, empty room. Along with the west wall, the glass walls on the north and east sides, which bordered the lobby of the building, were covered with brown paper. In the center of the east wall was a pair of doors, whose handles were bound with a heavy chain and padlocked. The south end of the room was a solid wall with two swinging metal doors in the interior corner. To the right of these doors hung a schoolroom-type clock that read 10:40. The room was divided by 4 square cement support posts, and dead center were 2 of the barrels that had been in the cellar. On top of them was some sort of mechanism with wires leading out to a pack of sticks that looked like flares banded together. It didn't take a great leap to guess that they were dynamite. "What is this place?" I asked as Alan Sari locked the outer door. "This was to be the future location to the second House of Persia restaurant." Their plan suddenly came clear to me. Using the cover of a restaurant they had already established to the point of respectability, they would spread into important buildings such as this one. They could then slowly, or even quickly for all I knew, fill them with enough explosives to level the buildings. "I take it you're planning a national chain," I said. He merely laughed as he pulled out his automatic weapon. He crossed behind the barrels and retrieved a length of rope, then came over to me. "Hug the post," he said, motioning to the one closest to me. "But I hardly know it," I retorted. In a flash, he whipped the butt of the gun against my temple, sending me sprawling to the floor. Pain shot through my head, echoing back and forth until centering on the spot where the gun had made contact. "Get up and do as I say." With some difficulty, I got back to my feet, then staggered over to the post and put my arms around it. My wrist just barely cleared the opposite side. He extracted a knife from his pocket, cut a length of rope, then roughly bound my left wrist and knotted it off so tightly I was sure it cut off the circulation. He then did the same to my right wrist with the other end of the rope. My wrist extended slightly past the end of the post, with about a foot of extremely taut rope binding them together. "You don't have to do this," I said. "Not here. Think of all the innocent people who'll die." "Think of all the innocent people you have killed in my country." "Murdering people here won't end hunger in Iraq. It'll just make matters worse. Don't you see that?" "Don't worry yourself," he said, bringing himself into view so that I could see his flat smile. "Not so many will die this time. You saw to it that I do not have enough explosives to destroy this building, but there's enough to blow a hole in it, a big hole, and you will be in the middle of it." Alan Sari went over to the barrels and grabbed a rag from a pile lying beside them. He came back behind me, held the rag by the corners, and slipped it over my head and down to my mouth. "Open," he said, dropping one corner just long enough to slap the side of my head. I opened my mouth and he slid the rag in, tying the ends at the back of my head. I fully expected them to leave them and was completely shocked when Alan Sari marched purposely to James and hit him hard across the face with the back of his hands. James didn't cry out as if he knew that would only make it worse. Alan Sari then grabbed him by the neck, forced him over to another post, and slammed him against it. Although it would have been impossible to yell for help, I found that with effort, I could just barely speak well enough to be understood. "What are you doing?" I can't even attempt to approximate what that sounded like. "We're done with him. It is time for him to die," Alan Sari replied as he trussed James up exactly as he had done to me. "Why? Why would you kill one of your own?" "Because he betrayed us." No, he didn't, I said. We found your hideout on our own. He didn't lead us there, not directly. Alan Sorry paused in his work and looked over at me. You know, I do not talk of that. He made the call there, trade me. The rag was cutting into the corners of my mouth, and I was getting lightheaded from the amount of oxygen it was costing me to try to talk. But I didn't understand. What are you talking about? How? He made the call, he said angrily. The call that brought the authorities to me. Did you think I'm so stupid? I did not see that I was being watched. The instant he called me, I know. That was how they found us, and now it will be a long, long time before we are able to recoil and make our strike against your country. For now, I will have to settle for a smaller strike and getting rid of the two of you. He went back to tying James to the post. I closed my eyes and hit my forehead against the post. That fucking stupid dumbass Fredericks, in his eagerness to find the jihad, using James and even putting us at risk, he had rushed surveillance onto El Ansari, and they'd been sloppy, and were seen. And as a result, El Ansari had taken James's call as a Judas kiss. Of course it was, but James had known he was doing it. But that didn't explain everything. James is going to them and telling us he was with them. Unfortunately, I didn't think I was going to have time to get the rest sorted out, and it didn't give me any comfort to think it might all be made clear in the next life. Alan Sorry gagged. James then went over to the barrels and fiddled with the mechanism on top. I don't know exactly what he did, but when he was finished, he came over to me and stood with his face close to mine. Do not worry, Mr. Reynolds, about your friend. He will be joining you very soon. We know where you live. I've set the timer for 5 minutes. I glanced at the clock. It read 10:55. I am now going across the river to watch the fun from a safe distance. As he went to the door, he added, You can be happy in knowing that you will be part of the first strike to make this a better world. He tucked the automatic under his coat and went through the door to the plaza, quickly turning the key in the lock. But I don't want to change the world, I muttered to myself. The minute he'd passed through the door, I started to struggle to pull myself around the post, something I was almost startled out of doing when I heard a voice outside call out, Yes, I am sorry. Several other voices cried out as he answered, Stop or everyone will die. I knew he'd managed to pull out that damned automatic before being shot. I continued to try to move myself to the right, trying to position the rope on one of the corners of the post. I was tied to so tightly that I could barely move, but knowing that you're going to get blown to bits tends to make you care a lot less about scraping your skin or pulling your wrists and arms out of their sockets. What do you do? They will save us, won't they? James managed to say around his gag. They won't have time, I said. He's stalling. With great effort and a lot of pain, I managed to pull my right wrist past the corner so that the rope was just slightly over the rough cement edge. I started to move the rope up and down as quickly as I could, scraping the skin off my wrist in the process. Trying desperately to cut the rope, I glanced at the clock. 1.5 minutes had gone by. Outside, Alan Sorry and whoever was in authority was shouting warnings back and forth at each other. Apparently, they were afraid to shoot, not knowing the situation inside. For all they knew, he could be holding the button that would trip the bomb. They didn't know the bomb was already set, and I couldn't cry out loud enough to tell them. They also didn't know that Alan Sorry was willing to stand there and die for his cause. I glanced over at James, who was attempting to do the same thing. I was, only without much success. As I frantically rubbed the rope, I said, I want to know something. Why did you go to them? Why did you go to their house? Because, he went limp and started to weep. Don't stop, I said. Try to do this. He straightened up and renewed his effort to pull himself around. I do it because nobody ever do anything for me before. You and your friends, you show me what it can be like. He was hard enough to understand under normal circumstances. It was even harder now. So, I said, sawing madly, He finally got his rope around a corner. I know these people. I don't know why they try to kill me, but I know it means they think I betrayed them, and they will try again and try to kill you because of me. So I call Yusuf again and tell him that I do nothing to them, and I do not understand why they try to kill me. He says he know I do it, and that I do nothing, and that you do nothing also. I say over and over, he tells me I must prove this. Keep sawing your rope, I said as he flagged. He gave me the number of his people here. I call them and they tell me to come. I do not want to go, but you have been so good to me, and so was Stevie, and I do not want anything to happen to you, so I go to them, but they do not believe me. They never did. They keep me there, and then Yusuf came. It was then that my rope, frayed from the friction, suddenly snapped, and I went flying to the floor. The standoff outside was continuing. I scrambled to my feet and ran to James with another quick glance at the clock. There were 2.5 minutes left. I pulled the gag from my mouth and yanked James from his head. Then went to work trying to untie his hands. Suddenly, Peter's voice called from the distance outside. Alex! Alex! Are you in there? Yes! I yelled. And there's a bomb! The debate outside grew more heated, with someone ordering Al-Ansari to drop his weapon. Of course, he refused. Why did you tell us you were with them then? I said furiously, trying to untangle the maze of knots Al-Ansari had used. I try to convince them that I am one of them so that they will believe me and that you have nothing to do with it. To do with what? I snapped more out of frustration over the damned knots than at what he was saying. To do with whatever makes them think I betrayed them. I know if they believe you did this, they will try to find you and kill you, but last night, when they found you at the house, they think I lied to them. They think I lead you to them. At last, I managed to pull the end of the rope through the last loop in the knot, releasing him. Just at that moment, shots rang out. We both looked to the outer wall. A body fell hard against the glass, then slid down to the ground. Al-Ansari had been killed. Alex! Peter called out from the same distance. Reynolds! Called another voice that I thought belonged to Agent Fredericks. Why would you do something so ungodly stupid as to go to them? We were trying to keep you safe from them and from our government. Because you risked your life for me. I know you are not safe from the jihad, and nobody has ever done for me what you do. And I want to give back to you. I want to protect you. You must believe me. I had another one of those moments when experiences during desperate situations where time seems to stand still. It was a moment of truth. All through this case, I'd wavered back and forth about James and what he was and what he was trying to do. Even now, after Al-Ansari had tried to kill him, I wasn't sure that this wasn't just another story. Perhaps now that his group had turned on him, he was trying to win me over again. I had to decide, and fast. Peter had said this with all about trust, and he was right. But he hadn't touched on the trickiest part. There comes a time when, for better or for worse, you simply have to decide whether or not you're going to trust someone. And the most difficult moments, you can't act out of knowledge, you have to act out of faith. It was the moment for me to decide, and I did. The outer door would lead us into their hands, and the inner door was chained and locked. I glanced at the clock. 75 seconds. Reynolds! Fredericks called. Don't come in! I yelled. We're tied up. There's a bomb in here. There's no time. Come on, I said to James. I grabbed his wrist and ran for the swinging doors. If this building was like every other one on Wacker, it was supplied through a dock on Lower Wacker Drive, the underground street used for deliveries, so there would have to be another exit leading down to it. And that had to be through the kitchen, since there was no other doors visible in the main room. I prayed that I was right and that it wasn't chained. We went through the doors, and I almost cried out with joy when I saw the door across the kitchen that was never to be standing next to the double verticals of a freight elevator. It was one of those doors that opens with a lever from the inside, but must be opened with a key from the outside. We raced to it, and I pushed the lever, but it didn't move. For one split second, I almost screamed. Then I jabbed at it again, and this time the door popped open. We went through it and down the stairs, taking them two at a time. Then it happened. The blast we'd been expecting roared like nothing I'd ever heard, shaking the entire building, including the staircase we were on. The heavy metal door we'd just come through was thrown off its hinges and flung down the staircase, narrowly missing James's back as he rounded the landing. The door crashed into the railing on the landing with a long, loud clang. We kept going, still taking 2 steps at a time, and went through the door of the bottom of the stairs and out into the grimy darkness of Lower Wacker. We stopped in the loading lane while I tried to decide which way to go. Traffic was whizzing by in both directions. Directly in front of us, in the center of the street, was a ramp leading above ground. I couldn't use that one because it would bring us up directly in front of the mark. Come on, this way. I led him north. The next closest ramp was 2 blocks away. Once we were moving, I realized that the ropes were still tied around my wrist, their ends dangling. Get those things off of me! James untied them as we hurried up the street. We didn't run for fear of attracting attention. Fortunately, there is very little foot traffic on that stretch of Lower Wacker, and the explosion had drawn most people up topside. When we got to the next ramp, we waited for a break in the rushing traffic, then ran to the center of the street and went up the ramp. Once we were back on Upper Wacker, I looked down the street toward the Merc. There was no sign of damage to the front of the building. People were pouring out of the front entrance and fleeing in all directions. Traffic, both cars and pedestrians, had come to a halt. We need to get off this street, I said, guiding James down Randolph. I stopped at Wells and pulled out my wallet, extracting some money and one of my business cards. Then I stuck the wallet in my back pocket, took out a pen, and scribbled an address on the back of the card. Listen, you know Stevie's building by sight, right? Yes. I turned the back of the card to him. This is his address. Can you read it? He stared at it with wide open eyes. Yes. Okay. Here's some money and the address. You know how to take a cab. I want you to go there. Mother's waiting for you. He looked up at me quizzically as he took the offered items. Your mother? She waits? How does she know I come? My mother knows everything. I wait for a cab. Do you think you can do this? You not go with me? Good heavens, no. I have to go back. Peter thinks I've been blown up. Can you get to Stevie's on your own? A curious smile appeared. To Stevie? He will be there? I'm sure he will. Yes, I go. A cab came to a screeching halt at the curb. I opened the back door and James climbed in. The cab was speeding away, almost before I'd let go of the door handle. I watched the retreating cab for a moment, silently muttering, I trust you, I trust you, I trust you. And then I took off for the Merc. Chaos was still reigning when I got there. It had been less than 15 minutes since the explosion, and whatever government agents had been there before it happened had been joined by a handful of uniformed police officers. The higher-ups would be on their way. A couple of ambulance crews were already on the scene and rushing in and out of the restaurant, the one that had been open, carrying people out on stretchers. Screams of pain and terror was coming from inside. Yusuf el-Ansari had been right. He didn't have enough materials to level the building, but he did have enough to blow a hole in it. There was a very large opening where the empty restaurant had been. It appeared to have blown in every direction, with varying degrees of effectiveness, taking out part of the first 2 floors and half of the basement next door. Perhaps because the room had been so hollow, it seemed that much of the blast had traveled outward toward the river, taking the line of least resistance. The uniforms were busy keeping the crowd back to the sidewalks. I scanned the debris-strewn plaza until I found him, standing in the midst of the mess like a fixed point. In the center of a whirlwind was Peter. He was stock still and staring toward the point of the blast. I waited until the cop closest to me was distracted by a question from a woman in the crowd, then slipped past their line. I carefully stepped through the debris. There was a lot of glass and came up behind my beloved husband. Waiting for the bus, I said in his ear. He spun around, stared at me goggle-eyed for a split second, then yelled, "Jesus!" and threw his arms around me, hugging me with all his might. Don't go all to pieces. I didn't, I said. His embrace tightened. Careful. I've been abused. He pushed me back to arm's length, keeping hold of my shoulders, and glared at me. Don't you ever do that again. Do what? Escape from an exploding building? He broke into a smile, then threw his arms around me again. Christ, I love you. I thought you were gone. I know. So did I. Over his shoulder, I saw Nelson approaching. Alex, he said. I'm glad to see you're alive. Peter released me, but kept an arm around my waist. You know, Nelson, I wish just once you could actually sound like you were glad I'm alive. To my great astonishment, he smiled. I've had superior training. It gets in the way of things like that. But I am glad. Now, would you like to tell me how it's possible? My face went blank. Yeah. I got free. I went out the service entrance, down to Lower Wacker. I thought I'd be safer there. I barely made it. I see. How'd you find me? I asked quickly, wanting to change the subject. Did you see them take me? No. As a matter of fact, it was through quite another means. I got hold of him right after you left, Peter interjected. He was beginning to regain his composure. I was at your city's Department of Revenue. For what? I asked. I was checking to see if the owner of the House of Persia had applied for a license to open another restaurant. They came up with this place. I broke into an admiring smile. You are one smart man, he shrugged rather humbly. Much as I'd like to agree, the fact is that it was the only tangible thing to do other than just interrogate the owner again. I had my phone off while I was talking to the clerk there. Peter's call came when I was leaving. I had him meet me at the spot you were supposed to be, and when we didn't find you there, I took a chance and we came down here. I called Fredericks on the way and alerted him, and he and some of his men joined us. Peter identified Alan Sorry when he came out the door. He paused and looked over at the wreckage. We should have been able to prevent this. You couldn't, I said. The bomb was on a timer. Alan Sorry was just stalling you guys until it went off. When he was shot, there was less than 2 minutes left. Nobody could have defused it. Reynolds? A shocked voice called from inside the bombed-out side of the building. The three of us turned to see Fredericks heading our way. I thought you were in there. What happened? Obviously I got out. We understood that you were with James. Where is he? I looked at the gaping hole, then back at Fredericks. He didn't get out. You left him in there? I shrugged. I had no choice. I got loose, but he was tied up, too tight. I couldn't get him free. Fredericks emitted a derisive, "Huh." Peter tightened the arm around my waist, offered me moral support. I glanced at Nelson. His face was turned away from us, but I could see the corner of his mouth. It was just slightly curved upward. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.